see their bureaucratic prestige, position, and opportunity in the weapons that they can design and create for the Soviet armed forces. And that the Soviet armed forces see the constant development and increase of these weapons as the source of their bureaucratic power, prestige, and position. I've long felt there was a convergent tendency in great bureaucratic operations, East and West, and I believe it operates here. As the 50s proceeded, so did this race, each side supporting the other, and with very few questions asked. One of the first questions came from a surprising source, Nikita Khrushchev. He would shortly be supported by another very strong voice, Dwight D. Eisenhower. The perception of Khrushchev was very different and very plausible. The bureaucrats, Malenkov, Molotov, Zhukov, had taken over after Stalin. Bulganin, Khrushchev was only one. Faithful surely to the old master, bureaucrats do not change things. Khrushchev traveled, visited the United States, spoke of the dangers of conflict in the nuclear age. The defenders of the notion of irrepressible conflict were not reassured. An infinitely tricky man, this Khrushchev, or a clever peasant. He had promised to bury capitalism. That surely meant the bomb. And there could be no reconciliation with a man who took off his shoes at the UN and banged them in public. The play was still with the defenders of the faith, military and civilian. In fact, as the 50s became the 60s, the perception of the conflict was changing, in the West and evidently in the Soviet Union too. In 1959, Khrushchev met with Dwight D. Eisenhower at Camp David. Khrushchev later called it the president's dacha. In private, if Khrushchev's memoirs are to be trusted, and neither the Soviets nor the CIA could possibly hire anyone with such a good imagination, the two heads of state exchanged thoughts on the way each was subject to the pressure for new weapons, each in response to the warnings of their generals as to what the other country was doing. Each resisted, as each said, and each eventually gave in. Khrushchev continued to speak for peace.
As a result of the useful talks we had with President Eisenhower, we came to an agreement that all outstanding international issues should be settled.
And now, as Dwight D. Eisenhower left office, came his powerful warning, the most influential speech of his career.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
What was it that awakened us to the dangers of this fatal rivalry? A rivalry propelled by forces within and between the two countries. On the decisive forces, everyone must be allowed to make its own selection. My number 5, they were Khrushchev, Cuba, the Vietnam War, the growing divisions within the communist world, and the persistent unwillingness of the human mind to accept persuasion that is in conflict with evidence. All who exercise power find this latter obstinacy by far the most annoying tendency with which they have to contend. To see the forces for change, we must go back to the early 1960s. Cuba is the kind of small country that history is intended to forget. It now became very, very large in this time. First in 1960, the Bay of Pigs. Not had developed since Joshua's trumpets were turned on Jericho, had there been a military operation in which there was so little rational expectation of success. The Bay of Pigs was at first defended by false denials of American involvement that the American people were expected to believe. This was a highly advertised rejection of the specific moral standard on which Dulles had based the war against communism. Then in 1962, Cuba again, the missile crisis. For a few tense and terrible days, people looked directly into the pit. There can be no doubt as to the result. Thousands and perhaps millions of people became open to the idea of an alternative to conflict. There were many speeches before on its inevitability. The generals were especially eloquent. There have been very few such speeches since. In 1964, Khrushchev disappeared from the scene, became a non-person. It was agricultural failure, not his foreign policy, that one is told did him in. I think he deserves more in memory from his countrymen than he receives. Bureaucratic power, we can assume, was further strengthened. By now, there was a new denial of Dulles, another proof that the conflict with communism was not a moral crusade. That, too, concerned a country that history was meant to forget, Vietnam. Vietnam, its government, were a very, very poor advertisement for morality. And the result was something new in modern history. War invariably has ended all discussion, all dissent. This war encouraged it, and especially among the idealistic young who would also have to fight. The objection came to a head in 1968 at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. I did not myself think that this was a time for neutrality.
In exile.
Those 10 days in Chicago, before and during the 1968 convention, were, I think, the most interesting of my life. We had no hope of nominating a candidate, but we could stand firm against any compromise that might endorse or excuse the war. The peace forces would then leave Chicago, far too large a group to be ignored. Our ranks held, and the voice for peace, for once, was more confident than that for war. The war was gradually wound down, eventually brought to an end. The old faith, meanwhile, had suffered another blow. China and the Soviet Union had fallen out, were going their separate and now opposing ways. No longer a monolithic communism to oppose. Richard Nixon, let all give him credit, saw the opportunity, went to Peking, went to Moscow, and was welcomed in both capitals. The faith was gone. Was it ludicrous to hope that the terrible competition was now at an end? It was too optimistic. Though the motivating faith was now gone, the competitive trap by which each power contributes to the military expenditure of the other remained. Now a kind of naked competition, a naked symbiosis.